Awesome. Let's go ahead and get started, and I'm sure others will continue to join us as the meeting goes on. My name is Christian Sosa. I'm the program manager for the Payne Fellowship that is funded by USAID, that's the United States Agency for National Development, and managed by Howard University. During this presentation, we're going to cover 3 different backstops. So it's going to be the program officer, the education officer, and contracting officer. I'm going to provide a brief overview of the Payne Fellowship, but I'm going to assume you have at least some base knowledge of USAID, base knowledge of the fellowship. Everything that I'm going to cover and some details that I'll leave out is found on our website, and I encourage you to peruse that as you start learning more about the Payne Fellowship. But I want to devote the bulk of our time to the panel members and hearing about their experiences in the fellowship and then also as foreign service officers. So we'll go ahead and get started. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to enter them in the chat box as I'm speaking or as they are all speaking, and we'll make sure to get to them in the Q&A. At the Q&A portion, I'll also invite, if you are willing and able to and feel comfortable to come off mute and ask your questions. You'll just use a Zoom raise hand function so we can facilitate that and make sure no one's talking over each other. Cool, house rules out of the way. Let's go ahead and get started. So as I mentioned, the Payne Fellowship is funded by USAID and managed by Howard University. And it has the goal of identifying and developing members of diverse and historically underrepresented groups for career into foreign service with USAID specifically. So historically underrepresented diversity, what exactly does that mean? We're looking at that several different ways and several different lenses. So we're looking at, of course, racial and ethnic minorities, opening the doors for those populations. We're looking at gender diversity. We're looking at socioeconomic diversity, geographic diversity, right? As you can imagine, the Foreign Service with USAID and State Department has been pretty historically white, old, male, and coastal, right? We're representing those types of populations, and this fellowship has the goal of creating a foreign service corps that better reflects the American population. So it is funded by USAID and managed by Howard University. That does not mean you need to be a Howard University grad, nor do you need to go to a Howard program to be eligible. We just have the honor of running the program on behalf of the agency. And it's named in honor of the late Congressman Donald M. Payne Sr. So Congressman Payne was the first African-American voted in New Jersey to represent his district, but he has a long legacy of promoting human rights and humanitarian aid. So this fellowship was founded in order to honor his legacy and do something that he was passionate about, which was opening the doors and ensuring that these populations know that a career in public service is also open to them. So on to the Payne Fellowship itself. The Payne Fellowship awards funding of up to $96,000 in funding over 2 years. So that's going to help cover tuition, fees, living expenses, and your 2 summer internships. I'm going to break that down just a little bit. So $20,000 is allocated for your tuition and fees. That is paid directly to the graduate program of your choosing, as long as the graduate program meets 4 simple criteria that I'll cover in the next slide. I do want to note, however, that we have a growing list of graduate program partners. I think we're at 33 partners at this stage that have agreed to provide supplemental financial assistance to selected Payne Fellows, and in some cases, even finalists in our process. So if you choose to go to one of those programs, you could get a bigger financial aid package, resulting in perhaps 80% or even 100% of your graduate funding, graduate school being covered. You're not restricted to those programs. You're certainly welcome to explore whatever research needs, faculty needs, location needs you may have, but they are there and they're willing to give you money if you so want it. So $16,000 is allocated to you as a Payne Fellow for a living stipend. That is paid directly to you, broken down into $8,000 each semester. You're welcome to use that money however you'd like. Many fellows use it to help pay for rent, books, transportation, things like that. But again, there are no restrictions to that money. That is yours to use how you'd like. Can you spend it on a down payment for a car? Sure, you can. I would encourage you to be a little bit more responsible and mindful of that money, as that is, yours to spend throughout the entire semester. $10,000 are allocated for your 2 summer internships. The first of which being on Capitol Hill, and it will take place the summer before you start graduate school. And the second would be overseas with a USAID mission taking place in between your first and second years of graduate school. We'll take care of the placements, we'll take care of the travel, the housing for both of these internships, and you're also provided with a stipend for these internships. Your main priority during this time is to learn, to experience, to network, and specifically with the USAID Overseas Mission internship, get a glimpse of what your career as a Foreign Service Officer might look like. So I'm going to cover the application pretty briefly first, beginning with we're asking for a lot of information on your academic background, and this is going to come in the form of transcripts. We do require that you submit a transcript for any institution that you received at least 6 college level credits from. So that means if you went to a community college and then transferred to a 4-year institution, we would need to see 2 transcripts as making sure that your grades are reflected on the transcript. So sometimes we'll have credits transfer over to a 4-year institution, but it'll just show it's been transferred, but no letter grade. We need to be able to see the letter grade. So that's super important. And that's also something to keep mindful of. Let's say if you studied abroad, we would need to see the letter grade associated for your coursework. Our application asks for applicants to complete a 600-word personal statement. This is your opportunity to tell us who you are, why you're interested in the Payne Fellowship, why you're interested in a career in the Foreign Service with USAID, and most importantly, how is the Payne Fellowship the next logical step in your journey to become a Foreign Service Officer? So again, this is a fellowship for graduate funding, but more importantly, it's a fellowship that's going to lead to that specific career. So we want to be able to see how you're interested in that career and why this is important for you to become a Foreign Service Officer. We do ask for information regarding your financial need. Financial need is something that we do evaluate as part of our application process. So in addition to the numbers provided by the student aid report generated from FAFSA, we give you the space to write a 400-word statement of financial need to tell us the story behind those numbers. So what are we not seeing in your student loan debt, your total cost of your intended graduate program, right? That might look like, maybe you worked full time during your undergrad, and that's something that's not going to be reflected in the numbers, but it's important for us to know. Maybe your family supported you during undergrad, but will not support you during your graduate studies. These are things that we would like to know to better evaluate what financial need might look like to you specifically. It's going to look differently for every applicant, but it's an important story for you to tell, and we encourage you to tell it without being shy, without being bashful, even though talking about your finances can be a little bit more difficult and sensitive to do. We do ask for 2 letters of recommendation, the first of which typically comes from a faculty member. So someone who has seen you in the class, ideally looking at your readiness for graduate school, your writing skills. I like to describe this first letter of recommendation as someone who can talk about your ability to produce work. Your second letter of recommendation comes from what we call a community leader. This is going to be someone who has overseen you in a certain project, maybe an advisor, a professional reference, somebody who can talk about your ability to do work. So they're quite similar, but very different perspectives. Producing work, but then doing work, your work ethic, your passion for community service, very different sides. So even if you are perhaps submitting 2 professional references because you're a little bit more removed from your undergraduate experience, I would encourage you to make sure that you have these 2 different perspectives reflected in your recommenders' letters. And of course, anything that you're proud of, let's say you presented papers, you published some research, we're going to give you the space to tell us what you're proud of. And that could be leadership opportunities or research opportunities, ways for you to tell us how you're shining in everything that you're currently doing. Our eligibility requirements are quite simple. So you must be a US citizen in order to apply. You must have a 3.2 GPA at the time of application. And finally, you must be planning to enroll in a graduate program that's starting in the fall 2022. So that's for this current application year. If you are not thinking about graduate school for fall 2022, maybe you want to go to graduate school in 2023, then you'd apply for the Payne Fellowship in 2022. So you always have to be looking 1 year ahead. So it's a little bit more planning on your part, but certainly you're able to put it off. So the graduate program has 4 simple criteria that must be met. Number one, it has to be in an area that's relevant for USAID's foreign service. So that's going to depend on the backstop you're interested in, the specific career track you'd like to do. And I'm going to go over what those might be for the three backstops we have represented today. It has to be a 2 years master's level program. So unfortunately, it can't be 3 years or 3 semesters. It can't be 5 semesters. It has to be 2-year program. Cannot be a JD or PhD. It must be a master's level program. It has to be traditionally delivered in person, so no online programs unless it has been turned into an online program because of COVID. That threw a wrench in everything, but has to be traditionally delivered in person. And finally, it must be based in the United States. So no international programs like London School of Economics. But for example, you could do Johns Hopkins University has campuses in Italy and China. That would be great because it's based in the United States. Those are just international campuses. As you can see, our application deadline has been extended. So it used to be November 1st, but we have given you 2 more weeks to work on your application. So it is now November 15th. All application materials must be in by that deadline, including your letters of recommendation. 30 finalists will be selected by December, and those 30 finalists will be interviewed in January, where you'll be scheduled to hopefully come into DC and have an in-person interview. If not, if we have to do it virtual, we'll be able to do that. And you'll find out by the end of that week if you're selected as one of our 15 fellows. So it's a very quick turnaround, but as you can tell, you'll find out in like early January, usually the second week, if not the third week of January. So you should be applying for graduate school and the Payne Fellowship at the same time because most graduate school deadlines fall on like February 1st. Great. There's so much more information on the Payne Fellowship and a lot more detailed information. So certainly go on our website. But now to provide some context on the 3 backstops we're here to learn about a little bit more about. So we have people who are interested in the program officer, we have an education officer, and we also have a contracting officer with us on this call. So I just want to provide a little bit more background on these backstops. And if you're not familiar with the term backstop, another way to understand that is a career track within the agency. But that's just how USAID calls it as your backstop. So starting with program officers tend to be more generalists within the agency. They help the mission run and are often working on projects across all the different backstops or assisting projects across all different backstops. So program officers are going to be responsible for country strategy development, policy formulation, performance reporting, all these great things that are making sure that the mission is successful in what they're trying to do. Education officers have a more technical focus on the education sector. So this could be working on projects that are reflected on access to education, whether that be through the K-12 level or even higher education level, looking at education policy, comparative education systems, things like that. And then finally, contracting officer, which is one that I'm learning more about myself, has more to do with how our contracts are formed and how they are in line with both US law and host country law. So they're going to be looking at how the contracts are built. And I'm going to leave Andrea to tell a little bit more about that when she's giving her remarks, as again, I'm also learning more about this backstop. So a couple of different relevant graduate degrees that might lead to these different backstops. This is by no means an exhaustive list. There are many ways to go about it, but I did want to share a couple examples if you're interested in any of these 3 backstops. So as a program officer, you're going to be more of a generalist. So we're looking at degrees like international development, economics, international affairs, public administration, even an MBA. Those are all going to be relevant. For ones like economics or an MBA, we'd like to see some sort of international curriculum within it. But essentially, we're looking at more general degrees that are about the field at large, not needing so much of a technical expertise or specialization at that stage. Education officers, by contrast, we're going to look for that education coursework. So it could be a degree in education policy or education administration, international education, comparative education, all these ways that we're looking at education specifically and ideally in an international context. You could get one of the more general degrees like international development or affairs, but it has to have significant coursework in education. So we were looking for those technical skills. Contracting officers is a little bit similar to program officers, where we're able to have those general degrees, but ideally we're also looking for skill sets or coursework in contracting, grants, international law, MBAs, right? So it's going to have a little bit more of the general bent of program officers, but we're still going to be looking for coursework and skills that are going to be relevant for the contracting backstop. So with that overview, that introduction to the backstops, I'm going to introduce our panelists. So we have one Payne Fellow, one Payne alumni, and one FSO. So different levels of experience, different levels of within the agency, but they all are going to be able to share some different expertise. So I'm going to start with Lanita, make sure I pronounce it correctly, and then we'll go to Layla and then Andrea.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christian. Fun fact for everyone on the line, Christian and I went to the same grad program. So I'm always advocating for the International Training and Education Program at American University. It was wonderful. A little bit about my journey to becoming an FSO. It's very untraditional. So I'll start early by saying there's not one way to be a foreign service officer. There's not one experience that you need to have being a foreign service officer. And I think that that's what really makes this program great, because people are coming from all different walks of life. So as y'all can see, I went to Pepperdine University for my undergraduate degree. My majors were international studies / intercultural communication and Hispanic studies. So a fancy way of saying I speak Spanish. And I went into the corporate world. I went into the private sector and was in sales and finance well before my time of joining the agency. I worked for GE Capital as a sales manager, I was in their commercial leadership program. And then I worked for Frito-Lay, the chip company, as a sales manager. So like selling chips and education don't seem like they go hand in hand. But during my time at Pepperdine, I was an ESL teacher for 3 years. And that was very influential to me because I worked with the Hispanic day laborer population, teaching them English as they were waiting for their jobs in the morning. And so that was my first introduction to development challenges. That being said, going into the private sector, I was seeing nothing of the sort. And I was having a hard time because I really did have a passion for service. Pepperdine is a Church of Christ institution that focuses in servant leadership. And so I was like, what's going on? Why doesn't anyone care? Like, there's issues going on in the world. And so through GE at the time, I had the opportunity to start raising money to build a school in rural Burkina Faso. And so I got a chance to go to Burkina Faso to start construction on a school that allowed for gender parity. So both boys and girls going to school at the same percentage rate. And I was like, oh my gosh, I love this. Like, I can't wait to change my career when I get back home, because selling chips isn't doing it for me. So I had that set in my mind, but unfortunately on the last day of my trip, I was involved in a terrorist attack with Al-Qaeda. And so that made things very, very real for me, that life is very short and you should have the opportunity to study and do what you love. And so coming back from that experience, I started Googling, oh my gosh, how can I get into education? And all of the jobs you needed a master's degree, which I could not afford at the time because after the event, I was just spending a lot of money in mental health care costs. And so I stumbled upon the Pickering, Rangel, and Payne Fellowships and applied for all three. But the world and the universe work in really particular ways, because as someone who is very passionate about education, USAID was the right agency for me, because when you go the Pickering and Rangel route, which are the State Department fellowships, you are truly at your best a generalist, where my expertise is very focused on youth development, youth workforce development, and I added a really cool niche through my graduate program, training, design, and facilitation. So I luckily was awarded the Payne Fellowship and went to American for those 2 years and had a really wonderful experience studying training design and pretty much comparative international education, where we're focusing on how do other education systems work, what works in Sweden, for example, might not work in Chile. What works in Guatemala may not work in the United States. And so I was very interested in how education systems function, but more importantly, in countries that suffer from gang violence and terrorism and youth recruitment, how do we not make that an option for youth? And so right now, as an education officer, I'm currently sitting in Guatemala City, and that's exactly the work I'm focusing on. So if you're awarded the Payne Fellowship as a technical officer, you specialize in a program. So you oversee a cooperative agreement, which is where our nonprofit organizations have a little bit more leeway in their programming, or a contract where we're kind of saying, hey, this is what we want and this is how we want it to get done. The project that I'm overseeing is a youth workforce development project called Puentes, or Bridges, that helps youth who are out of school get vocational training. If they want to start a business, they can do that, or they can go back to school. And so there's a bunch of things you can do as an education officer. You're more likely than not going to be overseeing a program. I also am the coordinator of the youth working group for our mission, which gets all of the minds in the mission on the same page about youth, making sure we're having youth conversations that are just as relevant for our environmental programs as they are for health, education, economic growth and development, and things of that nature. But one thing I want to highlight too, being someone that has a very unique niche and being able to design retreats and facilitations and look at things from a very systems thinking or how things work level. Not a lot of people in my Backstop have that. So not a lot of education officers come into the agency knowing how to say, I see a problem, let me design a training on that. And so what I'm actually finding out right now that doesn't really fall within my Backstop. So as a new officer, you're able to take advantage of rotations. So right now, I'm actually doing a rotation in the program office where some of those things sit. And so your first 3 to 5 years are really looked at as a learning opportunity, where if you have good leadership, you know how to advocate for yourself and say, I like this, I want to learn how to do this more. You can rotate through other offices and learn. And so right now, I'm truly like a design nerd. I'm planning a mini retreat for offices that are having a bit of a time with communication issues. I'm planning a retreat for my own office where we have completely new leadership. And so my graduate degree is just becoming more useful every day. But I look forward to answering you guys' question about education, because I think within the Foreign Service, there are ways to figure out what you like to do. You just have to finesse and finagle a little bit and definitely advocate for yourself. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Now, Layla, would you like to share a little bit more about your background?
Sure. Thank you, Christian, for organizing this. And thanks, Lanita, for sharing that awesome journey and story. So I am currently a Payne Fellow of 2020 cohort. Like Christian mentioned, I did receive my undergraduate degree at the University of Maryland, College Park. I graduated 2019. And currently I'm at George Washington University in my second year. I'll be graduating in May. And so I'm very excited to be incoming to USAID as a program officer in the near future. So to give you a little bit of backstory here, I found out about the Payne program, I think in my last semester of undergrad, through a professor, just through a casual like listserv email that I received. And I was like, oh, let me just take a look at this and see what this program is about. And at the same time, I was thinking, where do I go from here? Like where, what is my next step? Where have all these, what's my passion, right? And so me kind of having this moment of like introspection and figuring out like what to do next, I was in the point of looking at different opportunities. And so I came across the Payne program, and I, did some research, looked into the components and the benefits and what it would be like. And so I saw that it offered financial aid. And honestly, at that point in my life, I knew that I wanted to go to graduate school. At one point, I was like, maybe the Peace Corps will work for me. But then my mom was honestly like, no, like it's like a huge commitment. And like my friends were also like, some friends were like, are you sure about this? You know, it's a huge decision. In terms of the financial aspect, you know, you honestly don't make enough to be able to come back and support a family. And so that was a point where I was like, you're right, you know, maybe this is not the right path for me. And so I decided to apply, and I knew I wanted to work with local communities, local experts in the areas of health, in the areas of food insecurity. And I basically had a ton of interests, but I knew that health was like my primary area of interest. And so I wanted to explore different careers and in public service, and know that I knew that I wanted to do something in health. And so I decided to apply to the Payne Fellowship. I actually looked at all of the prior fellows, like the alums of the Payne program, and I was just like, you know, this is crazy. Like, I'm not even probably gonna qualify as a finalist because these are all overqualified individuals who have a ton of, you know, brilliant and amazing background and experiences. And there's me over here with like very little work experience. I did have some research. I was a research assistant. Research assistant. I did do work in environmental health. And in terms of like leading programs, I didn't really know a whole lot about that. But I was just like, let me just do this and see what happens, right? You have nothing to lose. And so that's something that you have to remember, is that never think you are, you know, less than someone. Never underqualify your experiences. Never think that you won't qualify for something, because you'll be surprised at you know, the uniqueness of your experiences and how much you can contribute to the world. Because for a long time, I was like, you know, this is not enough. I need to do more. But then, you know, I just decided to go for it. And so since then, I've had, I think, an awesome experience as a Payne Fellow, building a community with my colleagues and fellows. I've joined amazing webinars, and I've had an internship with USAID this past summer. I was interning at the program office at USAID. And so I did some work on monitoring and evaluation at USAID, kind of gaining a glimpse of how work is done, and also being able to network within my USAID kind of group and community. And so I would say, if anyone ever needs if anyone has questions or needs, you know, support, or has anything they want to talk to me about, like, I can make myself a resource for you all. And I can leave my email in the chat. You all can add me on LinkedIn, feel free. I'm not the best at these pitches, sorry, but you all can, feel free to use us use me as a reference and a resource. And I'll be able to answer any questions you all have. Looking forward to those. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Layla. And finally, we have Andrea here. So though she is not a Payne Fellow, we are super passionate about getting contracting officers as Payne Fellows. So she's here to share a little bit about her story.
Thank you so much, Christian. And thank you, Lanita and Layla. You have both had amazing contributions and really exciting journeys on your way to USAID. And as Christian said, I'm super excited about the possibility of having Payne Fellows interested in contracting. You guys make me feel really old. I've been a foreign service officer for 10 years. I graduated in 2003 from University of Virginia. I studied economics and religious studies. And then I went into the Peace Corps, and that was kind of my first introduction to developing countries and international development. It's how I learned about USAID. I came back and I was really committed to human rights, and I wanted to get involved in human rights in any way possible and fighting for human rights however I could. And so I went to law school. I went to American University. I would like to underline that you do not have to be a lawyer to be a contracting officer. I would say 40 to 50% of us are, but it is definitely not a prerequisite. Um, and when I left law school, must have been 2010. I really felt like I did some work in the private sector. That definitely didn't fit for me at all. I worked for a nonprofit that I was super excited to start with. And then there were lots of reasons why I didn't think that was a good fit for me either. Doing human rights work, I felt like it was really close to the human rights work and really impacted me in a lot of ways. And I didn't feel like I could sustain a career in that. And so that's where I started looking at federal opportunities, and specifically with USAID and contracting officer opportunities. I thought that working with USAID, it's kind of like you're not really doing the development work. You're there and you're working towards a really noble mission, but you're not like dealing with the beneficiaries and the people who are going through traumas on a daily basis. And I felt like that was a really great way for me to contribute to, what I thought would be like, my granito de arena, like my little piece of sand in making the world a better place. And so I applied for this position and I had no idea what I was getting into. I didn't qualify for the legal position that USAID offers. And so I was like, oh, well, I read the vacancy announcement for contracting officers. And I was like, well, it kind of sounds like this is something anybody could do. So I applied and I got selected for an interview. And still, I think as I was interviewing, I didn't know what I was doing, but there was a Foreign Service officer in the interview panel room, and he was kind of like fielding questions. And I like, well, what's it like to be in the Foreign Service? What's it like to be overseas with your family? What's it like to be, a contracting officer? And he gave me all this great insight. And by the time I left that interview, I was like, oh, I definitely want this job. But still, when I started with the Development Leadership Initiative in 2012. And so that was like a whole bunch of new a whole bunch of new Foreign Service officers coming in and lots of different backstops. And I would say that I felt really slighted. I think when I met them, I was like, well, maybe I want to be in like democracy and governance, or maybe I want to be a program officer. Like that sounds like really fun and really more like what I want to do. But 10 years in, I feel like this is the perfect job for me. And I think it's a really great backstop. And I think one of the detriments that we have is nobody knows what we do, especially before you come into the agency. And so how would you ever know if you'd be interested in it? But the things that I would say about what we do that are really great, or the skill sets that you need are, I think, an interest in international development, and an ability to understand and read regulations and laws, or maybe look them up on the internet, and an attention to detail, and kind of like an innovative spirit. I think that one of the things that I'm interviewing for new contracting officers right now, and you would be amazed by the diversity of profiles that we get. People who have been working for like the Bank of Switzerland for like 20 years, or people who have been, founded a nonprofit in Nicaragua and have built that from the ground up, for 20 years. And those people all come together, and they all have really interesting perspectives to bring. And we're so excited to be able to bring that, because when you come into contracting, you don't know anything really. Like, unless you're a contracting officer from another federal agency, you don't know what you're doing, and the learning curve is really high. And so what we look for in the people that we're recruiting are people that have great interpersonal skills, that are critical thinkers and analyzers, and that have a good attitude and a collaborative, like, teamwork spirit. And then we're going to teach you the technical skills of contracting. And then if you have all that, you can be a great contracting officer, because you can use those skills to build mechanisms that will have a a great impact. You know, the idea of a contracting officer is that we like to think of ourselves, and not in all the missions does this work out, but as being involved throughout the whole process. So like, we want to be involved in those design discussions, and because of our technical skill set, we can help shape those designs to accomplish the goals and objectives that the technical officers like Lanita want to achieve. You know, when she's building an education program, we can help her decide whether or not that should go through a contract or a grant, or if we should work with local partners, or if we should work with international partners, or if we should have a subawards grant program, you know, and together we can come together and make those decisions. And I think that, you know, my impact in that can help just better those objectives. And so I've also liked that we get to work with everybody in the mission. You know, we get to work with the financial management officers. You know, I could cover a portfolio that is environment, education, democracy and governance, and, you know, maybe another program in another regional country. Like in Peru, I covered Paraguay's very small portfolio. And so I feel like you get exposed to lots of different activities. You get a little bit of specialists, you know, in some different things. You know, I'm not going to be as specialized as Lanita is, but I'll learn a little bit, and that can be really rewarding and fulfilling to understand these different things that are going on in the countries that we work in. And so Christian gave me some prompts. I'll just give you like one more story, and then I know we can open it up for questions. What have been some rewarding experiences that I've had in the agency? And so one example that I could think of is in Peru. We had like 3 contracting officers there, but we also had a lot of regional coverage, and there were disasters always in South America. But maybe in countries that we didn't have missions in, like Uruguay or Argentina, they would have like a mudslide or some sort of event, and they would need some sort of response. And so OFTA, our like emergency humanitarian response in DC, would reach out to our mission, and I became like the specialist in doing disaster response. And so if there was ever like a quick grant that needed to go out, usually they go out in like 3 or 4 days with a local partner who's on the ground delivering humanitarian assistance. I would be the person working with those implementing partners, drafting the grant to make sure the money would get out as quickly as possible. And then immediately after, you would see the benefits. You know, some of our international development work is much more long-term, but with the disaster response, you know, you see the videos of like the people all of a sudden having shelter when otherwise they wouldn't, or being able to access, you know, some clean water or food. And so when we had, I mean, there was a huge crisis that I'm sure you're familiar with in Venezuela. And the humanitarian response didn't know how to get money into the organizations that were providing support to people who were struggling with food security in Venezuela. And so they called us up, and I was the lead to make sure or figure out a way that we could legally and safely get money into Venezuela to those implementing partners. And it was, I mean, it ended up being like $200,000 or something the first time around, but it was the first time that USAID was able to get money into Venezuela and do it like, you know, without those partners being subject to scrutiny because they were receiving foreign assistance. We had to be sensitive to that. We had to be sensitive to the fact that they couldn't take money through the banks because the inflation was so high. And so trying to figure out those types of, I would call them like stretching the capacity of our rural administration. You know, being super innovative, but still working within the laws and regulations is something that I love doing. And in the end, we were able to get that money there. And it was so successful that OFTA came back and was like, oh, this is great. Let's get another $100,000 in. And so we could keep replicating the process with this organization that was able to get food to people that needed it in Venezuela. And those types of experiences are just, you know, super rewarding. So that's just a small example of contracting and being a contracting officer. But as Layla mentioned, I would love to be a resource. If you have any questions about anything, life in the Foreign Service, or what it means to be a contracting officer, or how to apply for, say you're not selected as a Payne Fellow, which of course would never happen. If you want to apply through our normal process of foreign service application, we'd be happy to have you. And what got me, this is my last point, I'm sorry, I'll stop talking. What got me so excited was I saw the list of the new Payne Fellows that were coming in. It probably was Layla's class. And I read those and I was like, oh my gosh, the resumes and experiences that these people have are just incredible. Like, how can I tap into this program? And so I'm so excited to be here. And I hope that in 2021 or 2022, we'll be able to say that we have contracting officers that came through this program. So thank you all for your support and for letting me talk today.
Great, thank you all so much. So we're gonna go ahead and pivot to questions. And there's a couple in the chat already. And I encourage you all to take advantage of the different levels of experience in the foreign service we have right now, which I think is super great to have. So we're gonna start with a question for Layla, which is gonna go to your backstop of interest. So right, you have someone, you mentioned that you were interested in public health and did some work on environmental health, but can you talk about your decision to then pursue a program officer role and why it was a better fit?
Yes, thank you, Varun, for your question. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Sorry if I'm not, but that's a great question. And the answer is actually that my my direction was to pursue a health backstop. And so the thing is that that's a more technical area, right? And so for that, you would have to receive a master's of public health, a more technical health-based, program. And so, so my decision was to pursue a more general program where I could kind of tap into all these vast sectors, cross-cutting areas that I'm interested in, such as health, such as environment, such as education. And so, I mean, that's okay. I'm happy to be a program officer and happy to be able to experience and kind of collaborate with people who are working on all these fronts, right? Who have programs in education, in environment, in health, and wear many hats. And that way, I think will one day allow me to transition, hopefully, into the health officer role if I'm able to. So I hope that answers your question, Varun. Thank you.
Great, Layla. And to provide some further context on that, we'll work with you when you have once you're selected as a Payne Fellow and you have, your 3 or 4 graduate programs you're considering, you're gonna be asked to connect that very clearly to the backstop you're interested in, and then work with the backstop coordinator to ensure that it is okay. So, for example, with Layla, she ended up going with an international development program, but is still taking coursework in global health to prepare her for that eventual transition, right? You're not locked into most backstops. You're able to have some wiggle room and grow as your career grows within the agency. But at least you're gonna have a foundation from the backstop coordinator saying, like, make sure you have this coursework to at least have something to then build upon. But a great question to ask. We have another question in the chat, which is probably gonna be more for Andrea and Lanita. I'd love to hear a bit more about how a program is conceptualized and how you work with a different backstop to develop a request for proposal. I work on business development as an implemented partner, so just to see how the other side works.
I might throw the beginning half to you because I've only sat on the activity design stage where like we have an idea about. So hold on. Each mission has a CDCS, country development cooperative strategy. Maybe we use a lot of acronyms, but they guide how the mission has like work that they want to get done. And they go down to education and other levels as well. So for example, a project is closing now in Guatemala, and there really shouldn't be a gap between basic education activities. So there's a design phase about like what we're seeking to achieve in the next phase of a basic education activity. So we design it, we put out requests for proposals, it goes into a procurement sensitive stage where we're reading through their proposals. We're deciding who wants to go to the next stage of a tech. I don't know what tech stands for in our acronyms. I'm so sorry, but like pretty much going to how we're going to choose someone. They come present to us and then we choose. But contracting office is pretty heavily engaged in leading, and so I might throw the rest of that to on Andrea.
Andrea, thank you, Lanita. I think that, yeah, so experience with business development for an implementing partner is great experience, Yao Ling. So I hope you will consider joining the Foreign Service. I think that it gives you a good background on what it is that we do. But yeah, so I mean, the education officer, for example, puts together that design, and they look at the CDCS, the strategy, the overall mission strategy in the country. And then they say, okay, to accomplish this strategy, we want to do these 20 activities to overall go to that. And then each office will take their activities that are related to their backstop, like education, and try to distill it down to like, what is it that we really need? What are the objectives that if these were achieved, we would be able to reach our strategy. And we try to help them get to that. And there's lots of different ways to do that. You can be super directive and say you have to do X, Y, and Z, or you can say you can do whatever you want as long as you achieve this objective. But we'll work with the technical teams to design that, and then that goes into the RFP or the RFA, depending on if it's assistance or contract. And we'll put it out to all the implementing partners, or all, you know, it depends on if we're going to local or international, and then whatever comes back that's the best in our estimation is going to end up winning the award. I mean, I think the question is super broad, so I'm not sure exactly how to answer it, but if you have any more specifics, I'd be happy to. But yeah, I think you probably know a lot more than you think if you're working on business development on the implementing side.
Hi, thank you, everyone. This is Yao Ling. I go by Kelly. I think my Zoom settings have just stayed on Yao Ling. But I think my interest in asking the question is more to kind of understand. I think I've been kind of debating between whether or not I want to do a program officer role or maybe one of the crisis stabilization and governance role. So I'm trying to kind of better understand, I guess, more the differences between those two. And thank you so much for giving me that insight on how, you know, everyone works with the contracting officer as well. I think, you know, coming from the BD side of an implementing partner, our best friends are always the contracting officers. So it's great to hear a little bit more about that. But I'm definitely, I think, curious to hear the differences between how more of like the technical roles would work with the generals, like program officers.
I can feel that as a technical officer a little bit, also because I debated between DG, democracy and governance, and education. As a technical officer, you will be like well versed in what's going on in like democracy, governance, crisis stabilization. So you're going to have, for example, I'll use Guatemala as an example. Like we have irregular, our main issue right now that we're trying to solve is like irregular migration. So as a DG officer, you're going to be focused on how are our activities countering irregular migration to the United States? How is crime and violence participating in that? Versus as a program officer, you're going to be helping to report on like the operational plan. So like you're going to be helping with monitoring and evaluation. You're going to be helping when there is a new CDCS country. I can't think of the name, but when you're helping like figure out strategy. Thank you. When you're helping out figure like what the mission wants to do, you're going to be helping roll that out. You're going to be doing those sorts of activities, whereas the technical officer is going to be working directly with the implementing partner to ensure that the activities and the projects are technically sound in the area of crisis stabilization and whatever the other one is.
I would add on to that for you, Kelly, that for me, the program officer is like the mission intermediary. So they work with the Department of State, the embassy, any other agencies that are at the mission. They report back to Washington headquarters on everything like the operational plan, the performance reporting. They're also the intermediary often between we call it the front office, like the mission leadership. So the people that are running the mission go through the program office, and the program office makes sure that all of the activities are aligned with that country development strategy, that everybody's following the mission processes and procedures, that that we're responding to taskers from Washington and from the State Department. And that's, I don't know, the program officer role is a really interesting one. I always think of it as kind of like the center of the mission. They're directing all of these pieces, the spokes of the wheel that come out of it. So yeah, I do think you don't get as much of a chance to dive into specific details, but it's a very different role. And I think one that's well suited to people that have good interpersonal skills, that are like working with other people and being part of a team to kind of achieve objectives.
Thank you so much. I thought that maybe your answers would help me pick one, but I think it's just made the decision a little bit more difficult. So thank you so much for providing so much detailed answers.
Great. Timothy, I believe you have a question.
Christian,
Yes.
can you hear me or see me?
Yeah, we can hear you. And see
Okay.
you.
Okay. I can see you, but I can't see myself. This is interesting. Anyway, I am somewhere where the internet is. So if you guys cannot hear my question, please just let me know and I can type it. My question is for Andrea. Andrea, thank you. All to everyone on the panel, thank you so much. Andrea, I'm a grant writer in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I've been on grants.gov and I've seen a lot of the RFPs from USAID. And the funny thing is with my colleagues, a lot of them, when I told them I'm interested in international development, I own a grant writing and fundraising consulting firm. And so I get hit up a lot because I am African-American. I'm virtually one, if not the only one in my city that does this. And so I get hit up a lot the nations, especially in Latin America and also Africa. And so I want to find ways to help those individuals that are overseas build their entrepreneurial capacity, learn about fundraising and that sort of thing to scale up in their businesses for self-sustainability. And I wanted to ask you, when you mentioned grants, are you on the side of the process where you are actually the point of contact that creates those programs, draft the RFPs?
I think you cut out a little bit. Are you still there?
He cut off just a little bit.
He went on mute. Timothy, you're on mute.
Okay, can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think the last thing that I said essentially was, to make a long story short, Andrea, do you create those RFPs or those NOFAs from grants that go on grants.gov or the catalog of federal domestic assistance? And the second question would be, beyond just the Payne Fellowship, if I were interested in becoming a vendor with USAID or any of those other outlets as well, how could I move forward in that?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think that, yes, we create the NOFOs that end up on grants.gov. If you wanted to become a vendor, the best suggestion that I would have is just to keep your eye out for opportunities and bid on them. If you're consulting, I think that there are lots of local organizations abroad that could benefit from that sort of service. So I might try advertising towards them. Or working with big primes, like, somebody here is working with an implementing partner and talking to them about how you can be a sub-awardee, how you could help build the capacity of local organizations overseas, and showing them, the list is, Chemonics and DAI and all of those type of traditional USAID partners. They might be able to benefit from your work in being able to then have you capacity build organizations that we want to work with in the future or currently overseas.
Thank you so much for that information. It did cut off a little bit, but I'll just review it on the recording so that I can go ahead and start researching those opportunities.
Great. So we're about 3 minutes left and so many great questions in the chat. I'm going to push over to one question from Jin Mi. So for Lanita and Andrea, could you share more on what parts of or nuggets from your private sector experience have particularly helped to enhance your work as an FSO?
That's a great question. Quickly, management of people and time. Plus the bureaucracy, it is like painfully slow, which coming from private sector is a little bit like annoying at times. But if you know how to coalesce with the right people for clearances, there's like a dance in it. You can get the things done that you need to do. But to be honest with you, I think the other thing I'd say, I'm not jaded or the agency isn't my only experience. So I don't have a problem pushing back. So when I see something that quite frankly, like might not make sense, or to be frank, I'm the only person of color at USAID Guatemala right now. I'm the only Black person. I think there may be one other Black Foreign Service officer in Guatemala. I actually see like quite a bit of problematic things. And because I have I'm not jaded to whatever hierarchy is in the government, I literally always am like, no, that's not going to work. Like, that's really problematic. I hope to still have a job like soon, and I'm sure that I will. But when you don't see a lot of that and you're not attached to what that is in other senses, for someone that has been with USAID from beginning to end, it might be a little bit harder. Andrea?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I think that you can bring a totally different perspective that is really useful. And I think being task oriented and being focused on objectives is really good. And yeah, time management, I think people are really good at in the private sector. And so like being able to push through the bureaucracy, like Lanita said, is something that is really useful here. And I try to think about people's time and what it's worth. And I know they do that all the time in the private sector, and sometimes it's not worth our time to do certain things. I have to run, but I did want to say good luck to all the applicants. We hope to see you in the future, I'm sure, and I hope to hear more from you too. So I'll take off, but thank you, Christian.
Great, yeah, thank you so much. We're just about to close our session, so it's 1 o'clock, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Again, it has been recorded, so you will be able to see this at a later time. But thank you so much to Andrea, who just jumped off, Lanita, and Layla for sharing your expertise.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. And yes, feel free to email me with any questions, or if you want to talk about anything or get details, I can be a resource. And yeah, and Lanita also included her email. So thanks everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you. I just quickly, someone asked something in the chat that I think it would be good for everyone to hear. For folks that are who are not just directly coming out of undergrad, that are still thinking about doing it, I would encourage you to do it. A best practice is finding someone, if you had close relationships with the professor in school who knew your writing ability or saw you stand out in leadership roles, but someone who you also had as a leadership or someone in the community service area, it might be good to refer to the 13 pillars of foreign service. Although that's applicable to State Department, it's not a bad idea to have 2 recommenders hit very different points of that. So last thing, but anyway, my email's in the chat. Please don't hesitate to reach out. I schedule 30-minute calls for folks. So happy to help.
Great, thank you both so much. The Payne alumni community, very big mentality of lift as you climb, and we're super thankful for both of you to doing that and being a testament to that. So I'm going to go ahead and close the presentation and stop sharing. It's again going to be available at a later time, but thank you for joining us for our last event for Backstop Week.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.